Welcome to the State of Developer Education, a podcast by Major League Hacking. We explore how technical leaders are creatively tackling the developer education gap to help prepare the next generation of technologists for the real world and build businesses that can adapt to any changes in the technology ecosystem. I'm your host, Jon Gottfried. Welcome to this week's episode of the State of Developer Education. I'm Jon, and I'm here with Olivier Poupeney, who is the Director of Developer Ecosystems at Symphony. How's it going?
Hey, Jon. Hey, everyone. Very good, thank you.
Awesome, man. Well, it's good to have you here. I always like to start off and get a little bit of background on the folks I'm talking to here. So I'd love to hear a little bit starting off about what you're focused on doing, developer ecosystem work at Symphony.
So it's basically two parts. And the first part is developer relations. So it's a promotion of our developer platform, developer tooling, and help the community of developers to build extended automations on top of the core platform. Symphony is a collaboration platform, and people are interacting between each other using this platform and building solutions on top of that, and automations make them remove a lot of work they were doing before with emails and just phone calls, actually. So they become more productive, and they can do more because everything is automated.
That's awesome. And what exactly is Symphony, if you could give the elevator pitch? Because I'm not sure everyone is going to be familiar with it.
Sure. So it's dedicated for financial institutions to collaborate. You know that in investment banking, you have like mostly two sides, the one who is buying and the one who is selling, and they are trading on between them. And basically, to do those trades, they are using a communication way. So to agree on a price, to get informed about what kind of products is available on the market. So and it's very complicated to find the right person, and as well as talking securely. And so I will go back to that in a moment. But finding the right person is very important. At Symphony, you cannot create an account like that. Your company is creating an account for you. So when you talk to Olivier at Symphony, you're sure it's Olivier at Symphony. You cannot pretend to be someone else. So that's the very first important part. The second part about security, all the messages that are sent through the platform are encrypted by a key that is owned by the client. Which means that at Symphony, we don't know what traders are talking about. So we cannot influence the market. So that's also very important. And the second part of the security is to do things in a compliant way. It's very important for banks to report to government agencies that what they are doing, and regulators that what they are doing is conform to all the rules. They are following all the rules. So all of that is by nature provided by the core platform. And the platform is open through an API. And this is where the developers come to the scene.
So you're talking about a platform here that is operating in a highly regulated space, using fairly advanced technology, principles, right? Like you're talking about security and verification and trust and, encryption and like all of these things that the average developer would not necessarily be able to create on their own. To build on your platform, how much of that does a developer actually have to understand?
They have to understand like the way the core platform is working, because to have access to the API, they need to have also some kind of tokens that is given by both the Symphony server, cloud server, and the key managers, because they need their development, which is for automations bots, need to be to have the authority to encrypt and decrypt messages. And for that, they need to authenticate to a key manager and get the proper key to decrypt and encrypt their own messages.
So the developers who are using it, they need the proper authorization, but they don't need to be a security expert on their own.
Absolutely, absolutely. Everything is provided out of the box, so they don't need to be an expert in security to use the power of the platform.
That's really cool. Like, you're abstracting away all of these incredibly complex technical concepts into something that, you know, a wider group of developers can use, obviously in a specific space, but still a wider group than, you know, the amount of cybersecurity experts in the world. What do you find are, you know, the areas that you most need to educate developers when it comes to the platform? Like, what do they need to learn to be successful?
Well, once they learn the basic of the, I would say, the architecture of the platform and how it works, it's and the amount of APIs that are available to build things, because you can do everything that a user can do and more. So you can not only create and send messages or create chat rooms and add members, but you can also send very sophisticated messages, like a form, for example, or reply automatically when there is a form that has been submitted in a message. So things like that a user cannot do, and this is available from the API that we're providing. But all of this API is very gives you, like, sky is the limit. It gives you a lot of possibilities. So it's very difficult to consume this API because of its richness. So, and this is a part of developer relations, and why also it is under something we call developer ecosystem, is we build developer tools to ease the consumption of APIs. So we have a bot developer kit. And if you want to go beyond just what a bot can do, you can automate workflows. So we have a workflow developer kit as well. So we build those tools and we educate developers how to use those tools so that consumption of APIs is really easy.
What are some of the design principles and best practices that you use for, you know, building a good API or developer kit?
So our engineering team, by the way, the engineering team is based in south of France. I'm French, so I'm happy to say it. In Sophia Antipolis near Nice, and we have very good engineers there. They worked in the past. They have super experience on transactional applications that I cannot say the name, but everyone knows in the world. They build this API in order to make sure that everything is possible and everything is reliable, which is very important. We have kind of availability that is near 100%, like 99.99%. And considering the number of customers that we have and the number of messages that are sent by day, it's pretty impressive. And for that, of course, they use the best practices, all the best practices, not only to develop an API management platform, but to be even event-driven, which is important in what we do, because it's not just like consume an API and it's completed. Building APIs on top of a platform like Symphony requires to a certain kind of consumption for real-time events. So when you create a bot, for example, the bot is called by the Symphony server when there is an event. So when there is a new message, when there is a new chat room that has been created, when the bot has been added into a room, things like that, all the events are sent back to the bot itself. So to make sure that the developers of the community are using the best practices, put in place an education platform with trainings about how to develop bots, how to implement and automate workflows with certifications. So at the end of those courses, they can pass their certification and use that certification to add to their profile, which is something when I'm thinking about young developers who are just starting their career. If they go through this certification path, they can knock the door to the big banks and say, I already have experience to work with Symphony and develop Symphony bots. Everything on Symphony for developers is free, and you register at developers.symphony.com, and you have an access to the Symphony sandbox, developer sandbox. So you can use Symphony, you can create bots. You have also a bot account to be able to create your own bot, and you can follow all the courses.
Yeah, that can be a really powerful thing, right? To take a skill and bring it from company to company so that you can immediately have an impact as a developer, right? Like,
yeah,
that's a good way to further their careers. So talking about your career, we're talking about some fairly complex technical concepts here, or at least, how developers interact with them. I imagine you didn't have that familiarity when you started, right? Like, this is something you've built over time. How exactly did you get your start in tech and, developer relations?
So I have been lucky because in France, at the time I was at school, there was a dedicated cursus for developers, which was even before your bachelor degree. So it's really you're out of middle school and you go into that route.
Well, what was the tech stack you were learning?
At the beginning, it was COBOL, Pascal, and C. And it was a long time ago, so compiling a COBOL program, for example, took me like 20 minutes. A simple program, not a big one. Simple program. It was like 20 minutes on the mainframe. So I can tell you that if you miss an indentation, if you miss a comma, a dot, or something, you're really like wasting a lot of time, and that you can't afford when you're at school and you want to get your diploma. So it taught me how to compile the programs in my head before clicking on the submit. Today, everything is instantly, and I'm happy to see it. But well, yeah, when I started, it was not like that. And then I had a chance to see the transition between mainframe to PC, and this was quite interesting because personal computers came into the loop. It was in itself an innovation, but at the same time came another innovation. It was the network innovation with Ethernet, which was how to connect inside the same building multiple personal computers. It totally created new era of, and we called it client-server applications. And Oracle came at that time. Sybase created triggers and store procedure, for example, in SQL language. And I worked for this company. I worked also for another company called PowerSoft, who was one of the first client-server developer tool, and it was a very great opportunity to learn and be at the top of each new new innovations that was happening.
It's quite unusual how you got into tech, and what I mean by that is, for someone in middle school or high school to be learning what at the time was a bleeding edge technology is quite rare, right? Like even today, you're not going to find a lot of middle school or high school students who know, Rust or Go or, name your language of choice. Um, I mean, what do you think has changed, right? Like, do you think that students now have that same opportunity that you had at the beginning?
I don't think they have the same opportunity, just because the industry of IT is so big and so unavoidable right now. I think in a few you'll have to teach how to code to any child. It's gonna become like a normal language.
Like
Whatever
learning
the language,
algebra,
actually.
everyone will learn
Yeah,
coding.
yeah. Whatever the language. I started to learn how to program with something called pseudocode, which was not a language in itself. It was, I had a piece of paper, I had a pen, and I had to write the algorithm of what I would like to program. And this was corrected by the teacher. Those things that won't happen anymore. Now we are like, we have a lot of variety of languages that is changing every day. And it's very difficult to start because you're going to become automatically an expert of one language, but you don't have this foundation that I had the luck to have. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah.
And I think we should think a little bit twice about that, because educating new developers need to go really beyond just the languages or the topology of networks, right? It's much more than that. You need to learn how the computer is working. You need to open the computer and see what is inside and what the memory and the CPU are doing all together, and how instructions are computed at a very core level.
Interesting. It's funny, like I am, certainly younger than you, and I started off with more scripting languages than compiled languages, but I still remember, when I was getting started with computers, which was for me the days of dial up, right? So it was still, pre-modern internet. Um, in order to make my computer do anything remotely interesting required a high degree of technical knowledge. And that was a forcing factor for learning how everything worked, right? Like I built my own server to have in my basement to run, Linux and do interesting things. And there's this interesting, like, kind of like balancing act where as technology becomes more accessible and easier to use, the level of sophistication required to use it goes down. And you don't have that forcing function that you certainly had, and I had as well, where you needed to learn something to make it work. Like if you pop open an iPad, a child can figure out how it works, like a baby, literally. There's no barrier to entry, which is nice because more people can use it, but you maybe lose something in the process.
Absolutely. The problem is not when everything works, but when something does not work. And then you need to understand what is not working in order to find a workaround, or because you reached a certain limit, or because there is an error somewhere.
Yeah.
I was always amused to help the developers I had to in my team. Sometimes I do it less and less, I'm telling you the truth. But a few years ago, I was always amused how fast I would find their issues. And I
Yeah.
think it's back to the origin. It's back to the fact that I was not able to compile in less than 20 minutes my program. Then I can read a code and say, oh yeah, there is a problem here.
Yeah. I mean, problem solving and mental debugging is its own skill set that is kind of like tangential to programming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you mentioned Power Builder. Before my time, but I've done a little bit of research. What was that experience like for developers, building those first kind of client server applications, right? I'd love to hear a little bit about that, and even like what the similarities are and differences are to what we have today.
Well, it was super interesting. I missed that time too because it was a transition. It was a disruptive technology, not Power Builder in itself, but the client server. Imagine I was in France at that time. I was educating the developer community already, and I was doing training on site because there was not a possibility to do it remotely. And so I was traveling all the France, all the big cities, and to meet developers. And I used to spend a week with them, like 5 days in a row, toward a complete course on how to develop a client server application using Power Builder. And it was funny because at the first day, it was people who was coming from COBOL and mainframe, and they never touched a personal computer or a mouse. And I remember one day I had to tell someone to not push the mouse with the finger, but take the mouse with the hand. So it was like the very first thing to learn is how to manage the mouse. And he was not a user, he was a developer, someone who's going to develop something. And at the end of the 5 days, people were amazed about the new capabilities they were able to do. Things were more visual, things were more eventful. So it was a great satisfaction for them and for me as a trainer at the time, because the product that we were using, Power Builder, was quite awesome.
What are some technologies today that you think inspire developers in the same way?
Well, there is not one technology. Today, you have like a myriad of technologies in front of you that you can assemble. I really believe that we can reach composable business in not, I would say not a couple of years, but a little bit more, where it will be as easy as building Legos. For that, you'll have experts of every technology who will be able to bring those composable components that will be ready to be assembled in a coherent environment.
Yeah.
And this will provide new capabilities for yet another layer of developers that will be less tech savvy, but they will understand the concept of creating a software. And it's a little, we do a little bit like that already today without seeing it. When you use, for example, React to do front-end applications, React comes with already predefined components that you assemble and let you create your own components that you assemble to build your front end. It's pretty easy, and you can do, I would say, very easily 80% of what you have to do. The problem comes when you have to do the 20% of specific things that your designers are asking you. That becomes pretty difficult to build. But at one point, we won't have to do that, I think.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I feel like a lot of those technologies have come full circle. Like when I was looking up Power Builder, I was remembering back that I think it must have been high school for me that they taught us Visual Basic in a class. And there's a lot of similarities to how the whole architecture worked. And now you see these tools like Retool or similar things that are kind of reinventing that for a modern web stack.
Absolutely. This is also something I try to do prior to join Symphony, I created two softwares. One was called Ecensity Presentation Server, which was a kind of framework to build portal applications. And there was already this, what we call the portlets that were able to communicate between each other. So it was a kind of way to assemble visual components and build those applications. Then when the product has been sold, I created another product called DreamFace. DreamFace was what we call today a low-code platform, and this helps you to visually build your application, mobile or web, directly in the cloud with just a web browser. You know, tools like Wix to build websites visually with a lot of options. This was DreamFace, but more for application, like with relations with databases. And when the product has been sold as well, that I joined Symphony, and today we are working on a workflow developer tool, which provides a low-code approach. So it's always the same. It's a kind of evolution. It's always the same same thing that we are trying to provide to developers to ease their work and give them also the power of creating new things by themselves. I was amazed when we released our WDK Workflow Developer Kit by what developers can do. It comes today with a studio that provides a visual representation of your workflow. And I participated to the development of that visual representation. And all the tests I did was lower than what the developers are doing right now. Like the kind of diagram that they are building is like, oh, I never thought that they would do that. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, that's always one of my favorite things about working with groups of developers is that, you know, no matter how you designed the system or what the intended use was, people will take it in whatever direction they need to get the job done. And that leads to some really weird and interesting and clever, solutions to problems. I mean, we see this all the time at our hackathons. Like it's like that funny like saying of like, oh, if you have, monkeys at a keyboard, right, they'll eventually create Shakespeare. It's almost the same thing with developers, where if you have enough developers all trying to do something with technology, how they get there is almost irrelevant, but they get to some really interesting outcomes. Not that developers are monkeys at a keyboard, but
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So I'm curious, like the platforms you're talking about co-founding, now almost like 10 to 20 years ago, which was a very different era of the internet. What do you think differentiated what you were building from some of the modern tools? Like if we talk about a retool or something in that vein, or even something really advanced like Salesforce that people do build full applications on top of, what changed from when you were building that to now?
Well, I don't see a lot of changes, to be honest with you. It's just a different, the tool I was doing was very visual. And at that time, the front-end languages were not very stable. Angular, React arrived at the same time. It was not very stable. Angular version 1, then the version 2 was completely different. Version 3 never came out, and version 4 was even totally different than version 2. It's very difficult to build tools when the core languages are not stable. Now I think that we are in a more stable environment, and it becomes easier to build applications or to do an applications like I did 10 years ago.
Yeah, there's like a maturity of the ecosystem.
There is always a part that is immature because you know the nature of developer. You provide something, and either they like it or they don't, and you can't do anything for that. You know, you need. And we have new generations that are coming that may not like what was done previously. And if tomorrow there is a new tool offering a new, not new capabilities, but a new way to achieve the same kind of goal, maybe they will like it more. And there is nothing you can do with it. I'm not sure someone that is new to the IT market, trying to use the Salesforce capabilities to build an App Exchange app will really like it.
So even that might be kind of part of a previous generation already.
Absolutely. This is what I think. Yeah.
So I guess with that in mind, right, like talking about that next generation of developer, how would you recommend that someone get their start if they're, you know, just entering the industry today? Like what should they be doing with their time?
IT is probably the most competitive era. So do not try to be the expert of everything. It's just impossible. Try to find the domain that is the most that interests you the most, and that also offers the best opportunities. And it's not only the technology, it's the technology plus the market. There is no future of a technology if it's not linked to a market behind that. So for example, Symphony is for the financial industry, and this is its future as well, right? If tomorrow, so it's better to be the best in that domain than trying to be the best of all domains. Like the more you're open, the more difficult it is because the competition is very tough. We Symphony cannot compete with Microsoft, with Slack, with all of those big players, but they cannot compete with us on our market because what we do is very specific. And our team is full of experts of that domain. So it's a little bit the same if there is a young developer who wants to jumpstart his career. I would say try to have an overview of everything that is available and try to be an expert in one domain and start from here. And keep an eye open to move forward toward the new generation of technologies.
So understand the foundations, but specialize.
Absolutely. Very important. Otherwise, it's going to be quite difficult. I don't think, I always told myself, there is always someone who knows much more than you, who is much better than you. So don't try to pretend anything. Just try to be as good as possible in what you are doing, in what your duty is. That way you create records that that help you to progress in your career and new opportunities. Then you have to be open to new opportunities, new challenges as well, new risks. Always trying to become better, to learn new things, but still become more and more the best in what you're doing.
Yeah. Is there any like kind of parallel piece of advice that you would want developer relations professionals to take? Like, how do you think they should be supporting their developers going forward?
It's very tough questions because at Symphony, we started developer relations before the pandemic. And we were doing hackathons, developer meetups. It was working very fine. And then the pandemic arrived and there was no more hackathons. There were no more meetups. So the events we were doing was digital hackathons. but you cannot do digital hackathons on one day, one full day, because people, professionals, they don't have time to spend one day on hacking. So need to find a new way to run those events, still make them enjoying learning and trying to innovate. It's quite difficult, I would say. So unfortunately, I don't think I have a good answer to that questions, because we are still looking for the right way to do it. Our metrics were always like the amount of developers in our community, but we realize also that developers coming to our community were coming because they had something to do with our technology. And once they did their project goes into a maintenance mode. They don't need really to stay with our technology for forever. They will be assigned to some other project where there is no Symphony. So the kind of actions from developer relations are going to become a little bit more centric to developer teams that are pretty active, instead of thinking globally about a community.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Awesome. Well, one last question to finish up. I always like to finish on a fun one. Is there anyone in the world of tech that you would want to take to lunch, like someone you've never met but look up to?
That's a good question. It has to be related to tech or not.
Hey, however you want to take it.
I would say Albert Einstein.
That is a good answer. Not a software developer, but probably smarter than most.
Absolutely. And I'm sure if he would have access to all the technologies we had today to calculate even faster, he would have found much more things.
That's a really interesting thought experiment. What would a genius from pre-internet days do with technology?
Yeah, I would be super curious.
I'll be thinking about that one for a while. Well, I appreciate your time and everything you've shared. Thank you again for joining us, and thank everyone for listening. Happy hacking, everyone.
Thanks, John, and thanks, everyone.
The State of Developer Education is brought to you by Major League Hacking, or MLH. To find out more about MLH and how we power innovation, cultivate developer communities, and teach technical skills to students around the world, visit mlh.io. And then make sure to search for Developer Education in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at MLH, thanks for listening and helping us empower the next generation of technologists. Happy hacking!